die by lethal injection, provided, of course, that his appeals are turned down and provided that the country doesn't outlaw the death sentence at some future date. Professor Miller-Sheely, who we've been talking to, seems to think it will be at least 6, perhaps 7, perhaps 10 years before all the appeals are done and before Dylann Roof is actually put to death, probably by lethal injection. I say probably, Debbie, because here in South Carolina, you have two choices. You have the electric chair and lethal injection. At any rate, Dylann Roof knows now full well, because as he says, he knows the difference between right and wrong. He's not mentally ill, he says. He knows now that he will most likely be put to death for the murders of those 9 people at Mother Emanuel.
Solicitor Scarlett Wilson has indicated prior to now that she would proceed with the state death penalty trial, and we have not heard from her yet today since hearing this verdict from the federal jury in this penalty phase of the Dylann Roof trial.
Now, once again, that verdict came in quickly. It only took the jury 2 hours and 50 minutes by our tally once they got the case to decide on the death penalty. More team coverage of the death penalty for Dylann Roof coming up right now.
Live 5 News starts now with breaking news.
In case you're just joining us, Dylann Roof has been sentenced to death for the murders of 9 people at Mother Emanuel Church about a year and a half ago.
We continue with our team coverage. Raphael James is standing by with Professor Miller-Sheely, but first we'll go to Lisa Wiseman, who's standing by live outside the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. Lisa.
Yes, it's been a couple of hours since that verdict was reached. I'm standing outside of the federal courthouse where there are more than a dozen other cameras here, local news as well as national media outlets. Of course, the story made worldwide headlines when it happened a year and a half ago, when those 9 people were killed inside of Mother Emanuel during that Bible study. Those 9 victims read off by name during the prosecutor's closing arguments today. Over the past 4 days, we've heard their friends and colleagues and family members speak their memories, mourning them as well as mourning the future that many of them obviously would have had, including Tywanza Sanders, the youngest victim at the age of 26 years old. So it's been a very trying few months here in downtown Charleston at this federal courthouse. Of course, both phases, first the guilt phase and then the sentencing phase. The families have remained very strong, I'd say, inside of the courtroom as they sit just feet away from Dylann Roof, the person who killed their loved ones, who has showed no remorse. In fact, in court today, said that he would have done it again if he had, saying that he has he felt like he had to do it, and he still feels like he had to do it. So those were the words from Dylann Roof, representing himself during those closing arguments today as he talked face to face with the jury as they sat just feet away from him. It took them about 3 hours to come up with that verdict that he should be put to death. And from what we know from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, he will likely go to Terre Haute, Indiana, where he will await that death row sentence. Back to you.
Can you imagine the family members of the victims having to hear from the man who killed their loved ones that close, asking them questions, telling them things about the trial, about his motivation? That had to be hard, Debbie, very hard for the victims, the family members of the victims, to put up with. Here's the man who killed our loved ones, and he's giving us information, perhaps instruction, telling us what he would like us to do when it comes to him. Well, guess what? It didn't work. He didn't save his own life. He will be executed at some future date, perhaps 6 years down the road, perhaps 10 years down the road, but he got the death sentence.
We heard earlier, just a short time ago, from Melvin Graham, the brother of Cynthia Graham Heard, and let's hear what he had to say right now.
I just want this to stop. I really do. I'm tired. Every time I hear about the shooting, I cry. We have to stop this. And I think that if we could just stand up for each other like we did in the beginning, then maybe we got a pretty good shot of stamping this out. But we got to stand together.
That's Melvin Graham, an eloquent speaker speaking from his heart. You could see he was emotionally affected, as you and I would be. He also said this: justice has been served, but this is a hollow victory. He said, it doesn't bring back my sister. He also said, Debbie, a piece of each of us has died with Cynthia.
But he also went on to say, today this community stood up loud and clear for the Emanuel 9. I also want to read a comment from State Senator Marlon Kimpson. He said, I want to thank the jury for delivering justice in the Roof trial. We will keep working to honor the legacy of the Emanuel 9 and survivors.
We've been getting good comments, legal comments from Professor Miller Sheely. He joins us now with Raphael James. And Raphael, I know you're getting some good questions from people on Facebook who are watching us and sending us their questions.
Absolutely, Bill, and I want you to keep those questions and comments coming in to my Facebook page, Raphael James Live 5 News. Professor Sheely, I understand the AP is reporting that Dylann Roof is actually the first person to be tried under federal hate crimes and receive the death penalty for it. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I said, there are 59 people approximately on death row in a federal facility in Indiana. And I don't know the specific crimes that led all of them to get there, but I'm not surprised that this is the first one where they've pursued the death penalty based on a hate crime, based on a crime motivated by race or a national origin or religion or something of that nature. So a lot of the other people are there for, drug-related murders and things of that nature.
Read a comment to you from Lakeisha. She says they gave him the easy way out. She seems to feel like life in prison would have been a more harsher sentence, and I know there are some out there who agree with her.
I understand how they feel that way, but Dylann Roof's lot over the next number of years, whether it's 5, 6, 7, or 8, or 10, is not going to be easy. He's not going to have a good time in prison. He's going to be confined in a small cell by himself with very limited access to the out of doors, if any, and other people. I would not want to be sitting in a small cell thinking about dying in a number of years. I think that's pretty horrible.
Beth says, why out of state? Why will he be sent to an out-of-state federal prison if he was tried here? And you mentioned he may be sent to Terre Haute, Indiana.
Well, he was tried in federal court. He's been convicted under the federal death penalty system. So in terms of being in federal custody, and his custody issue between the state and the federal government has yet to be quite worked out. But normally in situations like this, they go to the federal facility in Terre Haute, Indiana. They are in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons, like all of the federal prisoners, and the Bureau of Prisons decides where you go in the entire United States, what facility is best. Again, right now, I think that's probably Terre Haute, Indiana. It's possible he could stay here, but I doubt it. But it's because he was tried in federal court for a federal crime, and because he's now been found guilty and sentenced, he is in federal custody, technically.
Paint the picture for us of what he's going to see. Will he be in a place where he gets to see grass and sunrises and sunsets? Will he get to play basketball and chess out in the yard? What kinds of things, what is life going to be like for Dylann Roof moving forward?
I can't imagine that life for those people is anything other than hell. Like I say, the main concern is their safety. That's why they're in that one facility. Everybody there is on death row. They're in a very small cell. They have access to very few people. They don't get to go outside the way you and I do and play ball and run around and do that kind of stuff. They get a certain time on the yard to look out and maybe see the blue sky once or twice a day. But it's not a good situation, and nobody should think in any way that this is going to be easy on Dylann Roof. It's not a situation that any of us would like to find ourselves in.
All right. If you want to ask more questions, go to my Facebook page. Right now, my Facebook feed is temporarily down. We'll get that back up and get to you live. Back to you, Bill and Debbie.
All right, Raphael, thank you so much. It bothers me, and I'm sure it bothers you and everybody out there, that Dylann Roof says he wasn't mentally ill, and yet, Debbie, he said repeatedly he showed no remorse for what he did. He thought it was justified, and he said to the jury, I would do it again. What I did was necessary. And yet, he made a point of saying, I'm not mentally ill. Don't judge me as a mentally ill person. He said that over and over.
He wanted to hide his mental background, and I understand the judge will be releasing the mental evaluation, although it will be redacted. We won't have a lot of the information that's in there. Redacted means some of it will be blacked out, so it won't be prejudicial to his state trial that could be pending. We're going to go now live to Lisa Wiseman, who's outside the courthouse, the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. Lisa?
And Debbie, he also said, yeah, he has pity. He has pity for himself. He says he shed tears for himself behind bars, feeling bad for himself, but he doesn't feel bad for what he did. Those came from jailhouse records. He also wrote, had written white supremacist type symbology on his shoes, and that was a point made in the closing arguments today. The prosecutor said he walked into this courtroom on this floor, in the presence of these victims' families, wearing those shoes that he had scribbled on behind bars. And I think it's important to note too, it was 2 days after the shooting, a day after Roof was arrested, in which he had that now famous bond court hearing where so many family members, 3 family members, stood up and said, I forgive you separately. My family forgives you. But as we know, and as we just had reiterated to us as well by Melvin Graham, the brother of Cynthia Graham Heard, that's not the feeling of all these victims' families. He says that he's a work in progress. I know so many others are as well, that they haven't forgiven him yet, and they certainly haven't forgiven him 2 days after their loved ones were taken away from them. But Karina Bolster was also inside of the courts during both phases of these court proceedings, and the family, they had the chance to hear from Dylann Roof once again today.
They did in his closing argument today. If you look at what his opening statement was compared to his closing argument, you could say he went longer talking to the jury this time around. In both of his statements to the jury, he seemed to target specific individuals. During his opening statement, he seemed to target his standby counsel, saying the only reason he is representing himself is to prevent them from entering mental health evidence, because as you know, he didn't want to be considered mentally ill throughout this entire trial. So that's why he said he's representing himself. Today, during closing arguments, he appeared to target the prosecution. He kept saying that their observance of him having hatred in his heart, he said that was not right. He said he doesn't believe it. He even went so far as to say, if the prosecution feels I have hatred in my heart that I allegedly have, he said, then I feel the prosecution hates me. So what makes the difference between the prosecution and myself? And of course, that's just a simple way of explaining it. That's not verbatim for what he said, but he really went on about the word hate and hatred and how he doesn't have hatred and people really don't know the true meaning of hatred. He also went on to say, as Lisa mentioned earlier, that he felt like he had to do this. He added that word felt in during closing arguments, and as we have told you all day, he still feels like he had to do what he did nearly a year and a half ago. And of course, that ended up taking the lives of 9 men and women, their family members in the courtroom today, listening to every single word that came out of Roof's mouth during that closing argument. I can only imagine how tough it was to hear sitting in the media room today, listening to all of this come out of his mouth. You know, we knew it was going to be interesting no matter what he said. I personally wasn't necessarily expecting something like that to come out of his mouth. You would hope he would, at this point, a year and a half later, show some sort of remorse, but the prosecution clearly showed, at least according to the jury and according to some other people out here, that he doesn't have any remorse about what he did.
Oh no, I mean, he wrote about it in court, saying
exactly
that he only pities himself, and that was a totally disjointed, hard to follow closing argument. I didn't know where he was getting at some points, kind of talking himself into circles. But he was looking down at his papers when he was at the podium, and seemingly, I'm guessing, read them to himself silently, and then looked up and read, what he was thinking as well. At one point in time, saying, "I felt like I had to, and I still feel like I had to." So that isn't the definition of no remorse.
Exactly. And he spoke very slowly, and you could tell he was thinking about what he wanted to say. And at the end of it, he paused, touched his face a little bit, looked down on his notes, and then finally looked over at the judge and said, "That's all."
Yep. Thank you. I'm done.
Yeah. Bill?
Question, Karina, for you or Lisa. Dylann Roof is 22. His life expectancy is not good. He'll be lucky if he makes it to 32, another 10 years. What was his reaction in court when he heard the verdict, the death sentence for you, Mr. Roof? What was his reaction?
He was really stone-faced. I mean, he didn't appear to show any sort of emotion. We do know throughout this entire trial that he has this, and I don't know if it's a habit or not, but he chews on his cheek. And so it almost looks like his mouth is twitching through the video monitor that I watch him on, but you didn't see him look down, except actually right after that verdict where it said, "We the jury, yada, 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 find the death penalty is the correct sentence." He looked down, shuffled through some papers that were in front of him, and then looked back up. But it's also important to note that every single time the jury has come into the courtroom in the past, he stood up and he's looked at them walk in. When the jury came in to read that verdict or deliver that verdict, he didn't look at them at all. And I found that very interesting.
Maybe he knew what was
Maybe he knew what was coming. I don't know, but that was just one thing that I picked up that I was watching for to see if he would be consistent about that.
Despite the plea that he asked of the jury, he said, if one of you is confident in your decision to not send me put me to death, then like I asked during the jury selection, if you're confident in a decision, could you stand up for yourself? Could you do that? And that's what he asked of the jury as well, to spare his life. Of course, we know at this point in time they have declined to do so. He will be put on death row. Now we're going to send things over to Carter Coyle. She is joining our team coverage here live outside of the federal courthouse. Carter.
So Lisa, just to paint the picture for you, we're here in the garden on this side of the courthouse. On the other side of the courthouse is an exit. There's a huge gate that goes up and down. And a little while ago, just before 6 o'clock, we saw that gate, that garage door go down. And at that point, agents were telling us that they were transporting Dylann Roof out of the building. We did not actually see him walk out because they did close that garage, but we did see kind of agents shuffling around, making sure that all points were secure. And then we got this video here of the van actually pulling out of the federal courthouse downtown Charleston here and leaving. We were told Dylann Roof was inside. We also were told by agents here on the scene that the jury members in this case have been removed to an undisclosed safe location. So several members of the media were kind of waiting on the other side, seeing if any jury members might come out. But of course, understandably, these are people who have just condemned one of the most notorious white supremacists we've seen in this country in years to death. So as you can imagine, security is of the utmost importance, and those jury members have been removed again to an undisclosed safe location, and that's according to federal agents who have been here for weeks and making sure that this entire court proceeding is safe. So what we know is that Dylann Roof is out of the courthouse, and the jury members who condemned him to death have also been removed to a safe location. Lisa, back to you. A question?
All right, Carter, yeah, thanks for that. And we know that family members, the victim's family members, oftentimes they would all lunch together. They would go to the nearby church here, St. Michael's Church, here in the Four Corners of Law, just across the street from the federal courthouse, for lunch. A couple of times, I know some of those family members broke away. One of them, when I saw one of them, and he told me that, sometimes it's just nice to get away from the group and to not be all together and having to kind of maybe feed off each other's emotions too, just to get by yourself and clear your head.
Well, I know even when I talked to Myra Thompson's son last week, Kevin Singleton, he had mentioned that it's nice being surrounded by people who are going through the exact same thing, because as you mentioned, they really are feeding off one another and trying to stay positive, or at least we're trying to stay positive throughout this entire trial. And so he just kept reiterating that they're hoping for a positive end goal, I guess is another way to say it, and a positive outcome for this trial. And you know, I think in some cases, this, for some of these families, this might be the one outcome they wanted. But it's hard to tell.
Well, that's good to hear about Kevin too. I know, you know, seeing them all walk together, I'm like, oh, well, they're friends. I see all these kind of different pairings of victims' families who've become friends since. Debbie?
I understand they have become very close. Dan Simmons, who is the son of Reverend Dan Simmons, had indicated that they had become very close. But I do have a quick question for you. According to Dylann Roof, this whole process isn't over. Take us through the steps after the verdict that you heard, the death sentence verdict, the fact that Roof wants to have a retrial, and on the grounds that he wants new lawyers.
I think Karina can take this one. You were inside the courtroom.
I mean, it was very quick. Right after that verdict, we kind of heard about what those next steps are. Basically, tomorrow morning, starting at 9:30, we'll have the formal sentencing hearing, and so that's when the judge will go through the formal wording of everything, explain what's going to happen, and then at some point, some of the family members of these victims will be able to stand up and address the court, address Roof. I wouldn't say it's necessarily victim impact statements, but they're able to share exactly what's on their mind. We could hear even more from what they're actually thinking about what happened. We could hear, you know, whether or not they agree with this verdict or if they disagree with this verdict. At this time, we really don't know what many of these family members are thinking about this verdict, because many of them have opted to kind of process this result in private along with their other families. That's why we only heard from Melvin Graham this afternoon. But after that formal sentencing hearing, Dylann Roof has requested that he get new court-appointed attorneys, and that he does plan to file a motion for a retrial, which means these family members may have to go through this all again, unfortunately.
Okay, well, they already do for the state trial, which is coming up. It's been postponed indefinitely in the meantime, because it was actually supposed to start up very soon, later this month, January 17th, I believe. It was supposed to start, so that's been kind of put on hold as well while these proceedings finish up.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa and Karina, live outside the federal courthouse. Let's hear some more now from Melvin Graham, what he said in a news conference about an hour ago. He is the brother of victim Cynthia Graham Hurd.
How do you justify saving one life when he took 9? And in such a brutal fashion, with no remorse? He just took them away from us because he wanted to. He decided the day, the hour, and the moment that my sister was going to die. And now someone's going to do the same for him. But unlike my sister, he has another chance. He's in God's hands now.
Melvin Graham, the brother of victim Cynthia Graham Hurd, who was the longtime librarian. He was emotional in his news conference, the only family member of the victims we've heard from so far.
He went on to say, Bill, if people feel like he feels, the community will not tolerate it. I want this to stop.
And let's hope he's right. You've got a statement here from the family of Dylann Roof. We rarely hear folks from the family of the killer, Dylann Roof, and Debbie's got a statement now.
We are Dylann Roof's family. We will always love Dylann. We will struggle as long as we live to understand why he committed this horrible attack, which caused so much pain to so many good. We wish to express the grief we feel for the victims of his crimes and our sympathy to the many he has hurt. We are Dylann Roof's family.
We continue, Debbie, to pray for the Emanuel AME families and the Charleston community, that coming from Dylann Roof's family. We also should point out, perhaps you don't know, that in the early stages of Dylann Roof's murder trial, his mother suffered a heart attack in court and was taken to the hospital from there. So that's where we stand at this point. Once again, if you're just joining us, Dylann Roof has been condemned to die for killing 9 people at Mother Emanuel in June of 2015.
I also want to read from the statement by the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch. She said, in part, no verdict can bring back the 9 we lost that day at Mother Emanuel, and no verdict can heal the wounds of the 5 church members who survived the attack or the souls of those who lost their loved ones to Roof's callous hands. But we hope that the completion of the prosecution provides the people of Charleston and the people of our nation with a measure of closure.
Let's hope that, that what Loretta Lynch says is correct. Let's throw it over now to Raphael James, who's with Professor Miller Sheely. Raphael?
Bill, Debbie, thank you very much. Professor Sheely, Dylann Roof made it abundantly clear throughout the trial that he did not want his mental health to be a part of this proceeding, especially during the sentencing phase. He did not want the jury to take that into consideration at all. He says he's fine. He doesn't have any mental health issues. Now that the trial is over, there are those who believe absolutely this young man has some mental health issues. Will these issues ever come to light?
They may. My guess is right now that what's going to happen is his attorneys in the federal case are preparing for his appeal. And we've heard about these closed hearings to the press and the public that Judge Gergel has had on his competency. That doesn't mean a record wasn't made of those, and I'm sure a record has been made of those. And a lot of this information that we don't know about is part of that record. I'm sure it will go to the Court of Appeals. So it'll be part of the record, part of the material submitted to the appellate court to try to persuade the appellate court that this is why he shouldn't be allowed to represent himself. He clearly wasn't thinking rightly. He was not rational.
Do you think that we will see more of what we saw this trial in the state trial? And I know I'm asking you to look at a crystal ball, but your professional opinion.
Well, you know, in terms of the basic facts the prosecution will present, there might be a different stylistic way in the way it's done. But this was done so clean and so crisp and so professional. I suspect that the state is going to present much the same evidence to the jury in the same way. Now, the real wild card here, I think, is not what the prosecution does, but what Dylann Roof does. Will he allow his attorneys to represent him in the state case? Will he try to represent himself? Will he allow his attorneys, now that he sees he's gotten one death sentence, maybe he sees he can perhaps get around another one? Will he let his attorneys present this kind of mental health evidence? So I think that's what we have to look for.
Professor Sheely, thank you very much, and thank you for your questions and comments on my Facebook page, Raphael James Live 5 News. Go there, like the page, and list your questions.
Now, your first alert forecast from Live 5 News.
All right, quick update on your weather. We have a little weak coastal trough. We had a warmer day today, and it's not going to be quite as cold tonight, albeit a little cool, but not bad. But this little coastal trough here trying to bring a couple of showers along the coast, maybe a few coastal clouds. Not going to be a major issue, though, as we check out the low country's most powerful live radar. It's First Alert, Super Doppler Max, all's quiet out there. As we look from the Charleston Harbor Fish House camera now at 58 degrees. Get up to 61 today. That's right there where we should be this time of the year. Humidity now at 78% with that south to southeast wind. 56 now out in Monk's Corner. Andrews, you're at 52, still kind of cool but comfortable out in North Charleston. 58, 53 Walterboro, hour by hour. If you are going out this evening, definitely a sweater, maybe a light jacket by 7 o'clock around 51. Upper 40s by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock around 47, 10 o'clock around 46 as you take the dog out for a walk later on tonight, or you're just out and about. It will be cool tonight, not quite as cold as it has been. High pressure and control, keeping things relatively quiet through tomorrow. 7 in the morning, looking good out the door. Nice by lunchtime and warming up tomorrow. So by the time the kids get out of school in the afternoon, we are talking about temperatures that are going to stay pretty much back into the mild, muggy side. So, well, let's start to warm up. That's what we're going to have. After a very cold start to the week, we are talking about temperatures back into the mid to upper 70s as we head for the end of the week. So up and down. Looks good for MLK Day, though, on Monday. Back to you guys.
We haven't heard yet from the governor, Debbie.
No, I was just checking Twitter to see if she may have tweeted a statement we heard so quickly after the initial verdict from Governor Nikki Haley, but we anticipate hearing something on the verdict. Dylann Roof sentenced to death here by the jury this afternoon.
I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something, too, from President Obama. You remember he led the prayer service in June of 2015, just after the massacre occurred at Mother Emanuel. For the latest, we invite you to go to live5news.com. Follow us on Live 5 Facebook and Twitter. See you then.